Chris Mannix joining us, and senior NBA writer for Sports Illustrated. Let me start with this schedule, Mannix, and the importance of the NBA coming back and playing these games on Christmas Day. What do you think?
The NBA understands that at least for the first quarter of 2021, it's highly unlikely that we see fans in the stadium. So to maximize their revenue, it's as simple as maximizing their games. And by starting the season during Christmas week, you can squeeze in a 72 game schedule that ends sometime in late June. And that's equally important, Dan, to this process as well. Adam Silver has said this to me, said this to others, but they want to get out next year before the start of the scheduled Olympics. They don't want to be playing deep into the summer and competing with swimming and track and field and things that people watch during an Olympic cycle. They want to be out at a normal time so they can reset their calendar going into the 2021-2022 season. So by starting in late December, they can get as many games as possible. They can fulfill their regional sports contracts, which is important, maximize those national contracts, and at least generate as much revenue as they possibly can.
Yeah, but the Players Union is going to push back on this.
Yeah, the Players Union has pushed back on this, will push back on this. Michelle Roberts, her comments this week to The Athletic are in line with everything she said to other reporters, including me. I spoke to her back in August and asked her about this specific question, knowing the NBA would probably want to get back at some point in December. And she said to me that 2020 just didn't feel like a realistic possibility. And now here you are, a couple of months before a penciled in start date, and Michelle Roberts is saying the exact same things. Now, understand, Dan, there are probably half the teams in the league that are going to be ready to go. You had 8 teams that didn't go to the bubble that have effectively been off since March. You've got another half dozen teams that were done in mid-August. There are teams out there that are ready for that start, but you can't underestimate the power of one team and the power of one player, and that's the Lakers and LeBron James in this process. I talked to a player just last night, and he told me, he's like, if LeBron doesn't want to play, we're not playing. So it probably isn't as simple as that, but LeBron James will have a big influence in this process.
Explain to me what the 76ers are going to look like when they take the floor this upcoming season. Now that you bring in Doc Rivers, you got Daryl Morey in there as well. What kind of style, and will we have the same lineup on the floor?
Oh, that's the question, right? I think the biggest question you have now is, what does this mean for Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons? Now, before Daryl Morey was hired, it was almost a mortal lock that you would see Simmons and Embiid back with this team together. It's probably likely that you see Simmons and Embiid back to start next season, but Daryl Morey is a freewheeling general manager who has not been afraid in the past to shake up his roster and make significant moves. And he's a general manager that bases a lot of his philosophies on analytics. And texting with other GMs, they kind of said the same thing to me. They were like, well, I wonder what this means for Embiid and Simmons. Will Daryl look to move one of those guys to create a more modern NBA? Like, Embiid is great. Simmons, despite the fact that he can't shoot, is a great player, but they don't necessarily fit the modern NBA. Embiid's a low post presence. Simmons, a non 3-point shooter. I think it's going to bear watching in the next month, 2 months, how Daryl Morey views this roster and if he thinks that Embiid and Simmons can play together.
But also you have Steven Silas taking over in Houston. So no Morey, no D'Antoni. And what's that mean for the style of the Houston Rockets?
Well, first and foremost, Steven Silas is an excellent coach. He has been effectively a coach in waiting for the better part of the last 4 or 5 years. He was considered strongly for that Houston job back in 2016 before Mike D'Antoni was hired for it. He's been considered strongly for another handful of jobs since then. He's got a great background. If you go back all the way to his early days, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson were 2 players that worked really well with him back in Golden State. So all that being said, the Rockets are an almost impossible coaching job at this point. I don't think their style of play changes simply because it can't. Like, they're not going to go out there and suddenly have salary cap space. They're not going to be able to significantly alter their front court to add another big man. I think Steven Silas is going to have his own twist on some things. But in Houston, barring a substantial deal involving James Harden, I don't believe you can change the way they play significantly enough to make a difference.
He's Chris Mannix, Sports Illustrated NBA senior writer. I'm looking at the Clippers. There was a little chatter about maybe Chris Paul coming back. Rajon Rondo with the Clippers. What kind of moves can the Clippers make to counter what's going to be an extremely strong, West again next season?
Yeah, I mean, they're extremely limited in what they can do. They don't have the draft capital to make a trade. They don't really have the assets in general, whether it's young players or otherwise, to make a deal. What they do have are some of these salary exceptions, and you can throw an exception at a Rajon Rondo. And Rondo, look, his stock hasn't been this high since he left Boston. It's as simple as that. I mean, the way he played in the playoffs, proving once again he's on a championship level. The Clippers could certainly use something like that. When Patrick Beverley went down in the playoffs, they were really missing something at that position, and Rondo can bring something to that slot. So I think you're going to see in Los Angeles with the Clippers some nibbling around the fringes a little bit. You'll see maybe a Rondo added or another big man added, but I still think it's more likely than not that the Clippers dig deep into their pocketbook, bring back some of the players they have as free agents, whether it's Montrezl Harrell or Marcus Morris or JaMychal Green, and try to run this thing back. That's kind of the message, Dan, they were sending when they brought in Ty Lue. I mean, Ty Lue is an excellent coach, but he's also a coach that can establish continuity, that can help that team hit the ground running whenever next season starts. So I think they bring this band largely back together.
I couldn't help but think when LeBron was celebrating the title, the confetti is coming down, that he was immediately thinking, who can I get on this roster? Like, what do we add? And, there was talk about Chris Paul, that can you bring in Chris Paul? Do you need Chris Paul if LeBron just had an incredible season as your point guard? What do the Lakers add or subtract?
Well, I don't know that there's much room for them to add or subtract anything either, for largely the same reasons that the Clippers have. But the Lakers are in a slightly different position in that in the summer of 2021, they could have some pretty significant salary cap flexibility. They could make some moves where I believe they'll be right around $30 million in available cap space, depending on what they do with some of these contracts this offseason. So their goal to make a significant change probably lies in the summer of 2021. The Chris Paul stuff, you got to remember, Chris Paul makes $75 million or whatever it is. Like he has one of the biggest contracts in the NBA.
That's an exaggeration, Chris. That's an exaggeration.
Perhaps it's a little bit over the top.
Right.
But if you're acquiring Chris Paul, you've got to basically gut your team or deal a big name player and really be willing to roll the dice. That's why a team like Milwaukee still looms, I think, as the strongest candidate to extract Chris Paul from Oklahoma City, which I believe is going to happen.
Yeah, they could use him more than anybody. And if they had Chris Paul this past season, I think it would have been different. I think he would have meant that much to them.
And Dan, you can make it work in Milwaukee. You can put together a combination of Eric Bledsoe, George Hill. You can sweeten the pot with a Dante DiVincenzo or a draft pick. You can make an appealing offer to a team like Oklahoma City. And if you're the Bucks, it's a no-brainer. I mean, worst case scenario, Giannis leaves after next season. You're stuck with one extra year of a big contract with Chris Paul. After the 21-22 season, you would wipe the books basically clean to start from scratch. So there is no easier move or more of a no-brainer move to make than Chris Paul going to Milwaukee.
Before I let you go, I know you're not married, but you fall in love a lot when it comes to the NBA draft. Have you fallen in love with somebody?
A little bit. Oh God, this is getting recorded. I'm a big James Wiseman guy. I don't know what to compare him to. I see a little bit of like David Robinson's game in him from back in the day. He's a hyper athletic 7'1" guy who I think if he is drafted by Golden State with the number 2 pick in the draft, he's going to be a player there for a long time. And he's going to be effective for that team almost immediately. I think whether it's a trade or Anthony Edwards, that's probably the number 1 pick. But Golden State sitting there at number 2, If they don't make a deal, I think James Wiseman's their guy, and I think he's one of, not the best player in this draft.
Yes, McLovin.
Chris, I know you've been in the bubble for a while. Have you been there since 1988? Have you noticed that centers don't matter anymore?
Athletic centers who can run the floor. Well, James Wiseman played for Penny Hardaway down in Memphis, and I was talking to Penny about this recently. Penny used to show Wiseman all these tapes of Shaq, and Wiseman's such a young guy that he viewed Shaq as kind of this, the lumbering big man we saw with the Lakers. He forgot, and you know this, Dan, in the 1990s, Shaq ran the floor. Shaq was one of the most athletic big men in the NBA, and I think Wiseman's got a little bit of that in him, a little bit of the ability to dominate and run the open floor.
What about my guy from Israel?
No, now you're getting too deep in the weeds for me there, Dan, at this point.
Denny Avita? No, Adija?
I'm not even touching that.
You don't
I'm
even
not
know.
even going.
This
I know who he is, but I don't know enough to.
God, he looks he looks great. Denny Adija?
I hope we're rolling on this stuff too, not just my.
Oh no, I've already said it before this.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
but
he
looks. He
could
could wind up being Nicholas Skidishvili for all we know at this point. Like, what if
Nicholas Skidishvili was just a tall guy. That was it. That was it.
Then he can be Dragon Bender or Mario Hezonja or Rafael Arroyo or any of the other international imports.
Or Dante Exum.
Dante Exum had injury issues. That's why Dante Exum didn't pan out.
My God.
I should say, hold on. I should say hasn't panned out. Still a long way to go for Dante Exum. Big opportunity in Cleveland this year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're talking about him. Hey, thank you, Chris. I appreciate your time as always.
You got it, Dan.
Chris Mannix.